This is a fan-generated show. If you would like to support us, please go to jamieglazov.com, and also don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. All your support is greatly appreciated.
Good evening. Welcome to the Glazov Gang. Tonight, Jihad in Paris. Our very special guest, Stephen Coughlin, the author of Catastrophic Failure. Stephen Coughlin, welcome back to the Glazov Gang.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Stephen, let's begin. What happened in Paris?
Well, I think what we saw in Paris was a classic Al-Qaeda/ISIS attack. I say attack because we saw that there was coordination among various elements. We also seem to be picking up what looks to right now to be an ISIS command element. Now, my big theory on how the next series of large-scale terrorism will unfold is we'll see two groups of actors. One will be, I call them the individual jihadis, and those will be people who act on a given day, and they'll just identify as ISIS. I argue that makes them ISIS, by the way. But at the same time you have those individual acts of jihad, you may also have a directed one for specific targets. So there's so much confusion that people don't know what maybe the specific target was. Now, in this instance, we know I'm a big advocate that Al-Qaeda and ISIS is an element of Al-Qaeda, and they might be factious. But when we read Inspire magazine, we'll go back a couple years, they specifically said going after sporting events is a main target. And that's what we saw, just like the Boston Marathon. And we saw some other things that conform to that. So I think what we saw, and someone gave me the date, and it's just not on me, that the date they struck had significance, and I just can't remember what it was. But in the Islamic calendar, I think what we saw is a series of raids and a series of other raids that were more directed. I don't think it's an accident that the soccer match had the president of France there.
Stephen, let's discuss a bit of the timeline here, because you just recently made a presentation where you explained that all of these things are not happening in a vacuum. You stress that what needs to be understood is that there's a certain timeline happening here. There's the OIC's 10-year program of action that culminates at the end of this year. And there's also Al-Qaeda's 2.0's execution matrix. Can you talk about that a bit, please?
Yes, beginning at the beginning of the year, and I really emphasized it after we saw at the beginning of year 10 of the 10-year program of action, and I'll explain this in a second. The first thing we saw in the first week of January was Charlie Hebdo. And then a couple weeks later, we saw the attempted killing of the people from Jyllands-Posten up in Denmark. Why? Because in December 2005, the OIC, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, met at the head of state level, and they came up with something called the 10-year program of action. And the 10-year program of action was to make defamation of Islam a crime in every jurisdiction, including the United States and France, and that they would work through the international agencies. The important thing to know today is that means they've been working through the United Nations, and it manifests itself in something called UN Resolution 1618, which Hillary Clinton in July 2011 met with the head of the OIC, a man named Ekmeladin Ihsanoglu, and agreed to use the U.S.'s best effort to pass this. Now, Resolution 1618 is stated in what I call facially neutral terms, so you don't pick up the specific intent of it, but its goal is to subordinate Western speech to Islamic law. Now, the very first thing that happened once the 10-year program of action was passed by the OIC is you had the cartoon crisis. And I have to say, I called that in real time. And every major talking point, every major thing they did has repeated itself consistently to this day. So what we have is the beginning of this year, year 10, they circled around and went to Charlie Hebdo to execute. They went up to Jyllands-Posten to try to do that. And a couple months later, you had the attempted killing of people down in Texas for the art contest on caricatures of Muhammad. So where it turned out the FBI knew that these people were bad. So I think that that's one timeline. And that's why I said we should expect to see large-scale acts of terrorism culminating at the end of the year, exactly like what we saw in France, and I don't rule it out happening other places. That's why I think you just saw in the paper that the FBI rounded up, I think, 60 or so suspected ISIS agents in America. Now, the second timeline, I like to use a source that everybody can look up on the web. There was a Der Spiegel article in 2005, and it was by a man named, I'm just looking at his name, Yassin Musharbach, and I can send you this article if you need to post it. And he wrote an article called What Al-Qaeda Really Wants. This is 2005 Der Spiegel, and it's based on his talking to a man named Fuad Hussein, who spent time in jail with a man named Zarqawi, who ran the Zarqawi network, which is now what we call ISIS and the Islamic State. And from 2002, he said what the timeline was. And I just would like to start with the fourth phase. They had these four. Go ahead.
Stephen, can I interrupt for a minute, if you don't mind? This case that you just referred to in terms of them rounding up ISIS individuals, can you just clarify, where did that happen exactly?
I believe they rounded up people in Texas just a little while ago today.
Okay, so just before we move on, I just want to clarify something. So if they know where these people are to round them up, I mean, did they just find out where they are? I mean, if they already know these people are here, if they already know where these people are, why haven't they already been rounded up in the first place?
Well, I mean, this is a really good question because, you know, I think starting with Anwar al-Awlaki, when he was walking into the Pentagon building briefing our generals on moderate Islam, the FBI was following him because they already had designated him a terrorist. The same is true with Major Hassan. They had him in direct contact. The Russians gave the FBI specific, credible information that the Tsarnaev brothers were actors. It turns out that almost every major terror attack since 9/11, our law enforcement people have had affirmative, positive knowledge that these people were dangerous. And I think that you're hitting a point. We're also finding that some of these people are Syrian refugees who they rounded up. So there is knowledge.
Right. So what I'm wondering in this context, Stephen, is, for instance, they're saying that France, for instance, just bombed an ISIS command center. So what I'm wondering is, did they just find out about this command center? I mean, if they already knew about the command center and intelligence, Western intelligence knows about this command center, why hasn't it been bombed already? Why hasn't Obama bombed this command center already? And overall, there's something happening here where there's actually bombs walking around, and we know they're walking around, and we're allowing them to keep walking around.
Well, I just have never believed that our fight against ISIS was anything more than stuff for public consumption here. And I may be wrong, and I'll take my hits in a couple places, but in the larger scheme, you hit the head right on the nail. Excuse me. You hit the nail right on the head. And that is that when Holland wanted to get targets, he had to get them from somebody. And I'm told he went to us and really shake the tree to get it. But, you know, my view is if we really were going into an air campaign, we'd have knocked them out a long time ago. So I just think that there's a total lack of sincerity in how we're fighting this war. And I also think that there's a lack of wanting to take affirmative measures to keep this from happening.
Stephen, let's get to what your presentation stressed recently. You talk about 6 phases. Tell our audience about these 6 phases, and you wanted to start with the 4th phase.
These are the phases of the timeline etched out by Al-Qaeda back in 2002 when it was called Al-Qaeda in Iraq. It was written when a guy named Fuad Hussein spent time with Zarqawi, partly in prison, I believe, and he gave up his plan. So this is the picture drawn in 2002. Why is this important? Because whenever you hear our people say we have Al-Qaeda on the ropes, we have ISIS on the ropes, oh, they're reeling from the fight, take a look at the timelines we created that haven't survived contact with a strike, and take a look at what they are in this. So you go to the 4th phase, and they say between 2010 and 2013, Al-Qaeda will aim to bring about the collapse of the hated Arabic governments. Well, I was briefing on Capitol Hill by September 2010 that these Arab countries were coming down. It was all a brotherhood operation from the very beginning, and that it would mask itself in a democratic movement. Come February, we called it the Arab Spring. And then about a year later, we had to listen to all these reporters and all these pseudo-experts say how the Brotherhood and the radicalization of the movement caused the Brotherhood to take control of it. It was always that. And most important, I called it in 2010, which is exactly the year Phase 4 was supposed to start. The 5th phase was supposed to start between 2013 and 2014. And that was the standing up of the Islamic State and the declaration of the Caliphate. Well, that had happened exactly in June 2014. So again, Al-Qaeda is exactly where they said they would be. So you started this discussion with two timelines, remember? One was this is the end of the 10-year program of action by the OIC, and the other is the event-driven phase timelines published by Al-Qaeda, nascent ISIS, and here is phase 6 to begin in 2016. And remember, they're exactly where they said they would be. And this is so important when we read these large groups of refugees, I'm putting that in quotes, many of whom, a disproportionate number of whom, are draft-age men. The sixth phase, Hussein believes that in 2016 onward there will be a period of total confrontation. Now, I think that on the one hand, should we say that we should stop the refugees just because of what Al-Qaeda said? No, I think there are hundreds of reasons why we should take a look at it. But one of them is, given that we have people, even the UN, I'm told, saying that that a high percentage, a majority of the people coming over in this refugee issue are draft-age men, and they're coming here, and we're looking at the wholesale violence going on in Europe. We're seeing these conflicts, outright hostility, and we're seeing ISIS take to the field. That I think they just arrested people here. I'm reading an article about Syria. I think we need to understand that if they look like a duck and they quack like a duck, and we have Al-Qaeda's own statement saying it's outright confrontation, we may want to take a look at that very seriously. Could I say one more thing?
Sure, Stephen, go ahead. And also, there's a seventh phase?
There's a seventh phase, and the seventh phase is definitive victory, where they declare total victory.
Yeah, very hard to see any good news here, Stephen. What is your concluding statement for us this evening?
I would like to give you two things. One, McCall is the chairman of the Homeland Security Committee is doing everything to take the word Islam out of the terrorist activities and call it violent extremism. He's really lockstep with the Obama administration, and they're going to stand up a CVE and DHS. And second, Paul Ryan has basically blocked Republican and conservative efforts to try to take a second look at this refugee issue. So at a time where there's a true groundswell of awakening, governors, including Democratic governors, saying, wait a second here. You have, once again, the Republican leadership thwarting the wishes of their own base and really concerned citizens on this issue.
Yeah, a very, very scary time. Stephen Coughlin, thank you for coming on the Glazov Gang, and thank you very much for being a noble and brave truth teller in this very frightening environment today. Thank you for coming on the show.
It's a pleasure. Take care.
And our viewers, make sure to get Stephen Coughlin's new book, Catastrophic Failure. And if you like this show and like what we talk about on the Glazov Gang, go to jamieglazov.com to support the show, and make sure you are subscribed to our YouTube channel. And we'll see you again soon on the Glazov Gang. Good night.